All right, there we go. We have a quorum. Welcome, everybody. The first item, please, is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 28th, 2019. Do I have a motion? Second. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? There are no opponents. Next item is public comment. We have 8 people signed up for public comment. First is Gail Weisberg, followed by Mary Miller, and then Gloria Meza. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Gail Weisberg. I live at 2730 Hampton Parkway, and I've come to talk about the condo deconversion issue. I urge the Evanston City Council to pass an ordinance similar to Chicago's, whereby there needs to be 85% of unit owners approving a deconversion contract for it to pass. I bought my condo in 2006 because I wanted to own property in Evanston. So a couple years ago, a contract or a company came by wanting to buy the building, or offering to buy the building. Some owners were wooed last year by a selling price that sounded great due to the current economy and the selling price of condos, but others of us didn't want to move and didn't want to sell because this is our home. The first time this came to a vote was last July, and the no sale won. One owner didn't vote, and the attorney, KSN, at that time told us that if someone didn't vote, it counted as a no, so we thought it was over at that time. The buyers came back a couple months later with an addendum which would benefit only a few owners who then voted yes. So we voted again on October 29th. At that time, 2 owners didn't vote, so the 75% threshold to approve the contract wasn't reached. But the attorney, KSN, changed his tune and then said that everyone needed a chance to vote because the no vote didn't reach what he called a 25% threshold, and the yes didn't reach the 75%. However, state legislation only mentions this 75%, nothing about a 25% no at all. If the 2 non-voting units were counted as a no, the do not sell would have won again, and I'm, of course, on that side. Instead, we had to wait another 2 weeks, and this gave North Park, the company who is buying the condos, more time to try to convince more owners to vote yes by giving them an incentive/bribe. In fact, we were told that North Park offered $10,000 to owners who would change their vote to a yes. On the vote on November 12th, the final vote was 75.63% yes. So 1 owner changed their vote. Frankly, I consider what has happened and the sale a hostile takeover. In summary, I urge the Evanston City Council to pass an ordinance similar to Chicago's so that it takes 85% of the owners approving a contract for it to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. And I failed to mention the 3-minute time limit, and you nailed it.
Oh.
2 minutes and 50 seconds. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Next up is Mary Miller for 3 minutes.
Hello and good evening. I'm Mary Miller, also a resident at Hampton Park Condo Association, also opposed to the deconversion. It has been a very stressful 18 months of our lives knowing and not knowing whether our building was going to sell or not sell. I'm not going to reiterate Ms. Weisberg's comments, but I do feel that 85% threshold is probably the best, the strongest recommendation that could be made. Also, consideration of having board members not having language that says that board members cannot receive incentives affecting their vote. We are not sure if incentives were given to the original board members and the board president who later resigned to kind of push this through. It's it's really been a heart-wrenching experience to see my neighbors go through this. Many of them lower income, many of them have lived there since the building was converted 19 years ago and don't necessarily have the means. I think that affordable housing and the shift in the law for affordable housing in Evanston has also impacted the sale. The original projections were on a price that was later reduced because the buyer submitted a contract with a change to have the buyers pay the affordable housing option of $1.5 million. That was rejected, and then the price was lowered. So our sale price is $1.5 million less than the original conversation was. Another piece there. I'm sure I'm close to 3
No,
minutes.
you're at 2 minutes, but if you're,
Yeah. So the last piece I would say is one of my biggest takeaway and lesson from this entire experience is that there are analytics that are done in the market that are looking for buildings for investors to purchase. With Chicago going to 85%, many of those investors in Chicago are now looking to the collar communities like Evanston to find buildings to deconvert. Our building was old. We had many stable board members that were there from the beginning who were not proactive about maintenance on the building. The bylaws and the language was never changed to limit rentals in the units, so now it's very difficult to get conventional financing. So I feel like we were preyed upon. We were a target as an easy mark, and now our building is going.
okay.
So.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next up is Gloria Meza, followed by Wendy Pollock and Leslie Shad.
Hello, my name is Gloria Meza, and I'm also an owner at 2730 Hampton Parkway. I am here to also ask you to consider changing the threshold from 75% to 85% for the deconversions. I also have a list for you, which I will hand out to you, but I'm going to read similar comments that my neighbors have already asked you to keep in mind. 85% owner approval of the sale is needed. Please consider board members cannot receive incentives from the buyer. It conflicts with their judgment in regard to fiduciary duty to all owners. Number 3, owners cannot receive incentives from the buyer. Number 4, owners cannot be held responsible for paying off their neighbors' underwater mortgages. Number 5, the 10% low-income resident rule needs to be reviewed. The rule did not cost the buyer anything. The buyer reduced the value of our property by $1.5 million, costing each owner $15,000 in property value. Number 6, the due diligence phase by the buyer has to take place before the vote occurs. Number 7, each owner should be told the dollar amount they will receive at closing within $500 prior to the vote occurring. Number 8, the association will pay for an assessment of each unit prior to the vote and determine that every owner will make a profit plus 10%. Number 9, a vote can only occur once a year due to the stress it creates for all owners. And number 10, a board has to fill out a form provided by Evanston that their building is for sale. Once the building is for sale, units can no longer be sold on the open market. If the form is not on file with, the building cannot be sold. There's actually 3 people that purchased units while we were not for sale, but were sold immediately at the time. If you guys, can I hand out a copy?
Thank you very much. Next up, Leslie Shad, then, I'm sorry, Wendy Pollock, Leslie Shad, then Albo Monte. Sorry, Wendy.
Hi, thank you. Leslie and I are both talking about the tree preservation ordinance. I'm very glad to see that you're taking this up and moving in the direction of giving greater protection to trees that are on private land, because private or public, they're all part of the urban forests. They're an important part of climate mitigation and adaptation. The one thing I would say from the memo I've read, it's very cautious. surrounding communities have much lower measures for trees that are covered on private land, like Winnetka, for example. Trees that are only 8 inches, which are pretty small, on private land require a permit if there's going to be construction. So I think there are probably ways to address some of the concerns staff probably have about how they would manage this, but I hope that you'll give it really positive consideration and think about also greatly increasing the tree replacement rate and fees while you're giving consideration to this as well. So thank you.
How are you?
I'm Leslie Shad. I co-lead Natural Habitat Evanston, and I already submitted comments, so I'm not going to repeat those. But I am, hoping that you'll increase the protection for the trees and make the diameter protection smaller and also raise the limits. I just want to point out, the only thing I wanted to add is that I was involved in protecting Isabella Woods, which is a preserved area of old growth forest in Evanston, similar to Lat Arboretum. It is leased from the MWRD. And I just want to say, for the 48 trees in Isabella Woods, I'm just making a pitch also for public trees. These are the city's trees. And for 48 trees, including 11 of them above 25 inches, which is what the proposal is from staff, the city was just asking $130,000. So that's about $2,700 per tree, even though these are 150-year-old trees, 100-year-old trees. So I hope you'll protect public trees as well. And
All right, next up, El Belmonte. All right, moving right along. Marina Sharapova and Igor Kozalevsky, are you here? If not, we can, gotcha.
Good evening. Igor Kozlovsky is my husband, so I will speak for both of us. We are both residents of 2750 Hampton Parkway, and actually I just would like to agree with everything that was just said today by our neighbors. Just one thing that was not covered is the brokers, the Intera company actually represents us as sellers and also buyers. I know that, for example, in California it is illegal, and I don't know why it is legal here, because obviously it creates the conflict of interests. And we have something in written, so we could just leave.
All right, so that concludes public comment. Thank you, everyone who spoke. First up, items for consideration. Is anybody interested in moving item P1? Alderman Ruth Simmons?
Ordinance 157-019, amending the municipal use tax in section 674. The Plan Commission and staff recommend amending section 674 of the zoning ordinance municipal use tax to revise language related to the process of noticing of municipal use exemptions. This is for introduction.
Is there a second? Seconded by Alderman Ravel. This item is open for discussion if there is anyone who wishes to discuss it. Seeing no lights, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The item passes. All right. Alderman Ravel, could you please move item P2?
Item P2 is ordinance 158-0-19, an application for major zoning relief to locate required parking more than 1,000 feet from a multifamily residence at 1570 Oak Avenue in the R6 General Residential District. Staff and Zoning Board of Appeals recommend adoption of the ordinance. The applicant has complied with all zoning requirements and meets all the standards for major variations for this district, and this is for introduction.
Second.
All right. The item's been moved and seconded and is open for discussion. Are there any comments or questions? Seeing none? Alderman Ravel.
Yeah, all right, okay. I need to find that part of the packet. It seemed to me that the applicant mentioned something about helping any residents in the building who have mobility difficulties, helping those residents find closer parking, and also, since there's going to be quite a difference in the cost of the parking if it's over at the Maple Avenue garage compared to the current parking lot, some offer of making up the difference in that parking rate, but there's no requirement mentioned in what we're approving tonight. I just wondered how we're going to be following up with that. Is that a staff question?
Good evening. That is a good point. Something that could be added to the ordinance when it comes back for action as a condition for as the applicant wanted to work with residents of the mobility issues and then subsidize part of that parking for a period of time.
Because is there any kind of reasonable alternative that anybody's mentioned?
I'm not aware of anything else that they've suggested.
Would this be a normal kind of requirement for us to make in granting such a special, for zoning relief like this? Does that sound like something we've done before?
Have we done anything like that before?
Alderman Ravel, I'm not aware that that issue has been discussed as a concern. We can certainly bring back something in the ordinance when it's for action if you'd like.
Well, since the applicant did mention it, and I'm trying to remember where I saw that. I guess, I thought there'd be maybe more something to it.
1116, page 1116.
1116.
It references a letter from one of the residents.
Right. Yeah, so is the applicant here to maybe address this issue, I think?
Yeah, he is.
Good evening. It was an issue that was raised at the ZBA, and one resident did submit a written comment to that regard. We did reach out to the residents, and we are going to continue to keep their parking space charge the same. We're not quite sure for how long, but at least through the term of their lease. And we will make up the difference between the cost of the Maple Garage and what they're paying currently. There was one issue that was raised with respect to mobility, and we've already spoken to that resident, and we're trying to determine a way to satisfy her concern as far as getting to and from the building. I'm not sure that, we didn't discuss anything as far as putting it within the ordinance, but, we have already made arrangements and reached out to our residents with that regard.
And so this would be going for introduction tonight, but then for action at our meeting in December. Could we ask you to come back in December and give us an update on how this is working and finding a place for the mobility challenged resident?
I could, sure, yes.
We can hold this till January, correct, timeline-wise?
Well, why don't we just introduce it and you can come back, yeah.
You could hold it till December, and then the action would be in January, because there's only one meeting in December.
Why don't we just introduce it and come back? If it's not addressed when we are here for action, we could hold it then. At least this gives the option of moving ahead if it's addressed.
Okay, then I move to hold it till our next meeting.
I literally,
Are we going to introducing it and then holding it?
That's
Okay,
what-
whatever. Okay, so we'll go ahead with it.
Okay. Alderman Fisk.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to figure out make sure I know what we're talking about. Are we talking about parking for the mobility challenge that is on or near the site? And that you would either provide parking for them or give them a reduced parking fee? I just don't want this to turn out that the city is going to be paying for a reduced parking rate, because that affects everybody across the city who's mobility challenged. And that would be, I think, really difficult for us.
No, we would still enter into an agreement and a contract with the Maple Avenue Garage for a fixed price.
Right.
Our plan was to keep the existing price for our residents only. Out of the 60-some people that use the lot, only 32 are our residents as of this month. Only 32 live within our building. So for those 32 people, we would keep the price the same. And that would be our cost. That would not be an obligation on the city at all.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
All right, so seeing no further discussion, this is for introduction. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the item passes. So we'll move on now to items for discussion. Item P3 is a discussion of the aldermanic reference regarding condominium deconversions. Staff seeks further direction on the reference from Alderman Fisk to review the local ordinance associated with the condominium deconversions. Alderman Fisk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I asked for this because after hearing stories from folks in my ward, and the people who spoke tonight are, I believe, 7th Ward, this is a major concern, and especially for the elderly and the financially challenged who may have bought in a building and suddenly find themselves forced to sell and not able to rent or afford rental in the neighborhood in which they owned a condominium. It's a real problem, and I appreciate the people who came tonight. So I would hope that the committee will support the Chicago model of 85% of approval for there to be a condominium deconversion in any building. As a former realtor, I feel there needs to be discussions in some of these buildings about maintenance and about board rules, and there needs to be a little bit more involvement in how your building is being managed. Alderman Wilson can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe one of the persons who spoke mentioned a dual agency apparently that's going on in the building. You have to agree to that. You have to agree to a dual agency. So I don't think that's something that we can get involved in. That is an issue for you to deal with your condo board. I know that makes it harder because you're considering the circumstances you find yourself in, but I think we would be fooling ourselves not to understand that when someone is interested in buying up a building like this, they're not looking to do affordable housing. They're not looking to lower the rates. We had an experience on Hinman Avenue in my ward, in this case with a rental building that had not been well maintained. Someone came in, converted 2-bedroom units into 4-bedroom units. We got them down to 3-bedroom units, but they were no longer affordable for the people, most of whom were elderly who had been living there. So this is a serious conversation we need to have at committee, and I think it would be a really good start to apply the 85% to any condo deconversion in Evanston.
Alderman Rainey.
Yes, well, I don't think we ought to apply the 85%. I don't think we ought to jump into this. Many years ago, some of you might not have been around, when the opposite was occurring, and that was we had a lot of wonderful rental buildings that were being converted to condominiums. And Evanston took a leadership role and was in the forefront of placing controls on how a building could be converted. And a lot of the people who are in buildings now that are being targeted for deconversion, those buildings were once rentals. Evanston declared a moratorium on all conversions while it took its time to develop a conversion ordinance. And our conversion ordinance and our moratorium was noted in Senate hearings in the United States Senate, in Springfield, and all over the country, and in universities. And we were really, really proud of that. We filed suit against some landlords, and we have a wonderful, wonderful, brilliantly written conversion ordinance. You can't just walk in and announce you're going to convert a building. People were being thrown out almost literally on the street until we stepped in and stopped that. So what I'm seeing now is something like that. And I think we ought to declare a moratorium on deconversions until we get our act together. I don't think we just ought to say 85%. I mean, there's more to it than that. There are big buildings, there are little buildings, there's all sorts of things. There are people without declarations that are any good. Give people time to look at their declarations, to make their rules and regulations. It's really the Wild West for deconversions in Evanston. And I think we ought to be very careful, and the people who spoke here tonight are proof positive of that.
Thank you.
I've had three deconversions, I think. I know one on Asbury, one on Callan in my ward.
All right. Alderman Wilson, then Alderman Ravel.
Thank you. So the first question I would have is that within our home rule powers? Can we do that?
We did it the opposite way.
I know why I just say.
Good evening, Michelle Mason, Cup Corporation Counsel. Yes, that is
Okay.
within your home rule authority. So the Illinois Condominium Act sets the minimum,
Okay.
and then for our home rule authority, we can go above it. I do have some initial comments for this, but if you would like me to reserve those for your discussion.
Why don't you go,
later.
because maybe there's some of the things.
Okay. So one of my concerns is that Chicago is not Evanston. Chicago has a much grander scale for their buildings, so 85% means something very different than it does in the city of Evanston. We have much smaller condo buildings for the most part, so if you do the math on buildings that are 6 units, you need unanimous consent. One person can hold the entire thing up. If you have 10 units, only one person, you need 9 votes. And so it makes for some very difficult interactions. A second point is that condos can do this right now. They can amend their bylaws. The city of Evanston doesn't have to get involved. They can try to amend their bylaws and set whatever rate that they would like. They're self-governed.
Okay. Thank you. And I had also heard from an owner of this building, and it's obviously very upsetting. So this is not the way I wanted to see things playing out. Alderman Rainey, I find your point well taken. I think we should come up with something, but in the meantime, I don't want more people being harmed because we haven't put something together. Among the points I want to make sure we would address are any unique consideration for a particular unit owner that's not given to all the unit owners. I do want to go back, and I was concerned about this aspect of the inclusionary housing ordinance pretty much from the word go. So I've always worried about who pays, and I don't want to be collecting money for our inclusionary housing ordinance at the expense of displaced owners. That's kind of the opposite impact that we were intending. So I want to look at that at the same time. But I'm okay with Alderman Rainey's suggestion. I recognize we have to put it on a future agenda, but I'm supportive of that.
Thank you. Alderman Ravel.
Well, I'm glad we got some information from the Corporation Counsel, because I had questions as well as to just what can we do. I certainly sympathize greatly with residents of the Hampton Parkway building. Many people, when they buy their condominium, that's their home. It's not viewed as some investment for the future. It's where they plan to live for the long term, and it's to have that future suddenly taken away from them is really, really difficult. So I would certainly, it sounds from what Corporation Counsel has said, is that it would be helpful to have a moratorium so we can come up with something that's tailored for, larger buildings versus smaller buildings, and address some of the fine points that were raised tonight.
Alderman Fisk.
Do we need to make a motion to,
You can, to put this on so you can't put it on the 9th because we as staff now have to get agenda items for the 9th due by tomorrow. So it would have to go in January. Unless I can put something together tomorrow morning. But
I bet
that
you,
is-
I
yeah,
bet.
I just can't. So I would have to research moratorium. I have to look at this up. If this is, I know, Alderman, you're saying legislative history shows that we have done this before for condominiums. I just have to look and find the past action.
If somebody would like to make a reference, then we could put it on the next appropriate meeting as soon as possible.
I'd like to move that we place a moratorium on the next possible agenda. This seems to be becoming an emergency.
Yeah, it's an emergency. Yeah, yeah.
All right, been moved in second.
Moratorium on deconversions. So that, I think you have to say, so that we can prepare legislation to legislate deconversions. A little redundant.
Doing the vote? Yeah. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? All right. Moving on to item P4, the tree preservation ordinance discussion. Staff is requesting that City Council provide direction for modifying the tree preservation ordinance. It's for discussion. And we have a presentation from Paul D'Agostino. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Paul D'Agostino, Environmental Services Coordinator. This is a short presentation on our proposed changes. You got this? I'm going to start just with a pamphlet that I got from the Morton Arboretum, which is one of the preeminent research institutions on tree-related material in the whole country. They really support, especially municipalities, protecting as many trees as possible, especially the bigger trees. I'm just going to highlight a couple things that are up here. They reduce stormwater runoff. They improve the health of people. They increase property values. They're good for businesses. They clean the air. They provide food and shelter for wildlife, and they keep us cooler and reduce our energy usage. Go ahead, Scott, unless I want to do it. Our current tree preservation ordinance protects all public trees as well as private trees in just two instances. That's in parcels 2 acres or larger that are planned for a subdivision and any parcel in a planned development. What we're going to propose tonight is to protect additional private trees 25 inches in diameter in all 3 species groups within the existing ordinance, other than the last one, which are the undesirable species, and I kind of explained that in the memo, as well as, and this is important, qualifying trees on the immediately neighboring properties as well, within 25 feet of that property line. And we came up with that 25-foot mark based on the definition in the current ordinance, which says the critical root zone of a tree is the equivalent of 1 foot in diameter per 1 inch of diameter of the trunk. So if you have a 25-inch diameter tree, within 25 feet of that tree is the critical root zone. So that's where we came up with that. And this is just a list of, it's kind of hard to read, obviously, species groups A, B, and C, which are, I would say, 98% of the most common private and public trees here in the city of Evanston. There may be a few out there that aren't on any of these lists. We're going to look at these lists, and we're going to actually propose, when we come back with the actual ordinance language, to change some of these categorizations on some of these trees, because things have changed since we wrote this in 2011. As was stated earlier, some of the other local municipalities have a much lower threshold to protect private trees, but they also have committed or dedicated employees on their staff that spend some of them 100%, some of them 70 to 80% of their time just enforcing their tree preservation ordinance. You can see, as was stated earlier, Winnetka has 8-inch. Go ahead, Scott. Lake Forest and Highland Park, these are kind of simplified of what their ordinances are because they have multiple categories of protected trees because of their ravine situations in their lakefront. They have, I think Highland Park has 4 different kinds of protected trees. They're protected, they're key, they're heritage, and they're ravine trees. And they're all different levels, and that's why I say 2 to 4 trees for each one tree on the replacement value. It depends on which category those fall in. So there's a wide range of things out there. Go ahead. And then on the examples I have in the memo, the development that was proposed for 2626 Reese, this is a photo of an oak tree that's at 2624, immediately next door to that property that measures 26 inches. So this would have been a protected tree, and they would have had to do something to either protect the root zone or would have had to do some kind of a replacement, either fee in lieu of or tree replacements themselves. Then there's the silver maple right in the middle of the picture here that's 23 inches. This was on the property of 2626 Reese. This would not have been a protected tree, so they would not have been required to save it. The 2390 parcel, the old Kendall College, these are 3 oaks right on the corner. These are all well over 30 inches and all would have been protected or should be protected. Go ahead. And there's a third development at 1118 Elmwood. These were on the property before demolition occurred. These all would have been protected. So obviously, the developer would not have been able to protect them because they are building almost the entire lot. So they would have had to either plan replacement trees to the criteria of the ordinance or pay a fee in lieu of replacement. And I think I calculated those 3 replacements would have been about $13,000 in that vicinity. And then this is a tree at 1120 Elmwood immediately next door, which should be protected, but is not being protected because it didn't fall under the ordinance as it currently exists. This is literally on the property line, and they're building, I think, within about 2 feet with a foundation at 1118. So I'm worried about that tree. The 25-inch threshold, we came up with that based on multiple conversations internally. We calculated what we thought the additional permits would come through based on 2018 and 19 permits of actual building permits, not re-roofing or anything like that, actual buildings on properties. It would probably double the amount we get now. Right now we get about 100, and they have about 450 that could qualify for this new ordinance language. About a third of those only would probably really qualify because of the 25-inch threshold. So we think we'll go from about 100 to about 200, roughly, permits per year. So we think we can do that with the current staff, with all the additional enforcement and inspections, because doing this as part of the building permit process is going to require multiple inspections. Obviously, we could lower the threshold in the future if we find that we can handle more or if we're willing to add staff, obviously. And also, I just wanted to put this in here. It does help to meet the CARP goal. That's specific language in there to adopt a tree preservation ordinance that requires obtaining a permit for tree removal on private property. So we're in line with that. As I said earlier, we're going to look at the current ordinance and not only change language about the private trees, but we also want to look at the current fees and penalties as well as those categories of the different trees. And with that, I'd be happy to answer.
Appreciate it. Alderman Nguyen, then Alderman Fisk.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, if you lowered the diameter to like 20 inches from the 26, did you look at the number of trees that would encompass to do your calculation on whether the staff could, there's enough staffing to do that?
I didn't really look at, we talked about lowering it. We just think without an accurate inventory of trees that are on private property, it's really hard to predict how many of those 400 to 450 are going to actually kick in the private tree preservation ordinance.
So can you explain, I think I don't understand, what's the 4 to 450? That's 4 to 450 trees that you?
But that's how many building permits community development gets
Okay.
that could potentially qualify for the tree preservation ordinance to go into effect. Those are permits that they get for actual construction on a property rather than.
Okay. So,
the
but
other
they
ones
may
get.
not all of those might have a tree. on
Correct.
it that-
A
that-
lot of those, probably 3/4 to 2/3 are probably not going to qualify at all because they're things like they're just replacing their garage. So
Right.
that's not really going to affect anything else on the property other than an existing garage. So I looked at them in that manner of, if they're building an addition, that's something that could definitely, this could apply
Right.
to.
Although we just had an instance in my ward, the 3rd ward, where someone was building a garage and coach house, and they took down a big tree in order to do it, because the big trees tend to be at the back of
Right.
properties. So, because I worried that the 26-inch, I think we all worried that the 26-inch diameter isn't going to protect enough trees. And I would rather err a little bit on stretching the staff and finding funding for more staff to protect the trees than have, given what has happened to us with the emerald ash borer. And we're holding our own on the Dutch elm.
Right.
But who knows what's going to come next? And seeing the instance that just happened in my ward, where the zoning staff worked really hard and came up with 2 other alternatives for the property owners, but they said no, and which was within their right to do.
Sure.
But it was a big Siberian elm that came down. So I guess I'm trying to figure out whether we're going to really overwhelm the staff if we reduce it to 20 inches.
It's almost impossible for me to say how many more that would generate. I really can't tell you.
Well, so I have one other question then, but so a 26-inch oak is actually going to be significantly older, correct, than?
Absolutely,
Like
yes.
a 26-inch elm or, so is there, should we take that into calculation as well?
We could.
But, I mean, I don't
We
want
could
to
look
make
at different
things.
species and how they age and maybe have a graduated number for the diameter that are protected.
Right, I mean, oaks are so valuable, so should we have a lower number for oaks and than we do for, I don't know what tree grows really fast, but I know elms do.
Silver maple grows very fast.
Right, yeah. Mhm.
It's probably half as, if maybe half, less than half of the age of a same-size oak.
Okay. Well, I don't want to make this more complicated, but I would like to make it so that we can actually enforce it effectively.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can definitely look at that.
Thank you. Alderman Fisks and Alderman Ravel.
Thank you. So this is an 8.5 by 11-inch sheet of paper. So that's 22 inches. So we're talking about 22 inches is this, so 25 would be that. That's a really big tree.
Yes, it is.
So if we do 20 inches, then we're down to about this diameter, which is a big tree. So I've gone out and measured trees because I've learned how. And the point about oaks and elms and silver maples is really interesting because oaks are so slow growing. And I think if we're going to be a real tree city, and take climate change very seriously, we've got to look at what these trees really provide us. And I'd be happy to start with the 25, but I think Alderman Nguyen has convinced me we need to go lower than that. I don't want to overburden our staff, so I'd be willing to say, let's go a little bit lower, and then if that seems to be working okay and staff isn't overburdened, then we can reduce that a little bit more. But I think we really need to do something right now, because I think that, we're losing a lot of these grand, old, wonderful trees.
Right. As you can see, Wilmette has a graduated rate. Their oaks, they're protected at 24 inches, elms at 30 inches, and hickories at 16 inches. So that can be done. It's not that complicated. It actually puts more of a burden on the developer or the resident to figure out exactly what kind of trees he has on his property.
Right.
Because a lot of people just don't know.
So if we said oak 22, elm 28, hickory 16.
Our hickory is very slow growing.
Yes. We don't have very many hickories, though.
All right, Alderman Ravel?
Well, I second the direction of the conversation that my colleagues are taking this. So when we talk about this, the role of the staff in terms of being part of approving or not a tree coming down on private property, so is that something that staff just gets involved once the building permit application comes in?
Yes.
It's not as though we'd need to do some big survey of the city ahead of time, or?
No, we would not have to do a survey. We would put that burden on the developer or the property owner to tell us what they have. We would require a tree inventory of the property, basically.
Right, yeah, okay. Well, I like the idea of, having some of the truly, really valuable older trees, and the oak trees in particular, have a smaller diameter where we protect them. I'd also like us to, and I think, Paul, you mentioned that you were going to be taking a look at the, what we charge when trees need to come down and adjusting that penalty. Is that-
Potentially, yes.
Okay, because I think that would be an important step as well.
Right.
Yeah, Alderman Nguyen.
So when these other instances, when these other communities have a replacement, what's the size of the replacement?
That varies widely, too. I kind of put that up there
Why, maybe I missed it.
as tree replacement requirements. Park Ridge, they permit so many trees, and because they're down to the 10-inch mark. If you take a protected tree down, you pay the permit fee, and then you have to replant another tree.
All right, so it's 1-to-1?
It's 1-to-1.
Right.
Right, so you take down a 30-inch tree and plant a 3-inch tree.
Well, that,
and
okay,
you're
so,
done.
so that was my question. I mean, a 3-inch tree, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, our current ordinance says you have to replace it inch by inch
With,
at a ratio based on which category it falls into.
Okay.
The highest one is 125%. So if you take down 10 inches of trees, you have to plant 12.5 inches of trees. So we get more than that.
okay,
A lot of them are at 100%. Winnetka says if you take down 30 inches, you have to plant 30 inches. Lake Forest and Highland Park are all over the board, depending on what category they fall in.
yeah.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Well,
And then if they're not able to plant that required inch, then I subtract what they can plant from the requirement, and I charge the fee in lieu of that at $150 an inch. And then we use that money to plant trees where we need them.
throughout the city, okay. What do we need to do? Yeah.
Well, I think, Paul, we've gotten some good direction
Yes.
here, and then we can revise the documents that we've been working on and bring to the next appropriate meeting, not the 9th.
No. Okay, thank you.
All right, great, thank you very much. That brings us to items for communication. Alderman Ruth Simmons.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to this now so that we don't have to pull it off at the council meeting. For introduction, we passed P157-019, amending the municipal exemption in section 674. And that recommendation came from the response and concerns from the pumping station, the water pumping station, and how that was handled. I'm recommending that we use a noticing process consistent with other processes. The municipal exemption omitted some steps. And Director Leonard, if you don't mind just speaking to the new steps in this process. So we have a few municipal exemptions. In the recent past, we had the water pumping station, and it's my understanding some time ago we had a fire station. And those are examples of what municipal exemptions would be. But if you could speak to it, Director Leonard.
Sure.
Thank you.
So the the goal here was to provide more public notice that would then direct people to the Design and Project Review Committee. So I think, Scott, it's 1,000 feet, 500 feet. So a notice would be required. We are able to obtain the addresses of everybody living within a point of 500 feet. Addresses are curated. Notice would be sent out, and it's a postcard that would provide information and ways that people can get more information and also provide comment on it.
And can you give is there any other example of what a municipal exemption structure might be?
We are sitting in one right now. This is an R5 and R4. Thank you, Scott. R4, and you couldn't put this building without a municipal exemption.
Thank you.
Any other items for communication? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned.